Well, the annual United Nations Climate Summit is underway. Delegates from nearly 200 countries have convened in Baku, that's the capital of Azerbaijan, for talks. Amid warnings, the world is on track to break temperature records again this year. During his opening address, COP29 President Mukhtar Babayev urged delegates to address what he calls an existential problem.
Colleagues, we are on the road to ruin. But these are not the future problems. Climate change is already here. From flooded homes in Spain to forest fires in Australia, from rising oceans in the Pacific to barren plains in East Africa. Whether you see them or not, people are suffering in the shadows.
COP29 talks opened with an official handover to Azerbaijan. The main focus of this year's discussions will be on ways to increase climate funding to help developing countries who are often disproportionately affected by weather disasters. Only a handful of leaders from the G20, whose countries account for nearly 80% of global emissions, are attending. While the two-week-long summit is also being held under the heavy shadow cast by the re-election of Donald Trump in the United States. He had previously threatened to roll back the U.S. carbon-cutting commitments. And we're joined by CNA's climate change correspondent Jack Bord live from Baku. Jack, we just heard the COP29 president there saying we are on the road to ruin. This kind of hyperbole is not uncommon in this discussion. Can Azerbaijan make any real difference on facilitating climate action at this summit?
Look, no doubt Azerbaijan will be hoping that they can push the needle, but they are taking over global climate change leadership and negotiations at a particularly challenging time. Look around the world and see the unfolding crises that are happening right now. Economies are struggling. There is growing levels of mistrust, conflicts raging in the Middle East and in Europe and Africa. So a tall order, I think, for Azerbaijan to really be able to deliver progress, particularly around climate financing here in Baku. And we heard from Mukhtar Babayev there. He took over the presidency of COP just a few hours ago. He said that people around the world are suffering in the shadows. They're dying in the dark, and that the world needs more than just compassion and paperwork. So certainly saying all of the right things at this stage. But there are looming questions over whether Azerbaijan will be able to deliver. It has image problems, it has credibility problems. For the third year in a row, these COP talks have been led by a petrostate. Azerbaijan, no exception. Its economy is overwhelmingly reliant on fossil fuel production. 90% of its economy, of its exports rather, are from oil and gas. So vested interest there to maintain producing fossil fuels, and Azerbaijan has become a major gas supplier to Europe because of the Ukraine-Russia conflict. So a lot of challenges, I think, ahead for the presidency. Whether they can make a difference here, well, the whole world will be watching that closely.
Jack, you mentioned the focus on funding. So essentially finding the money, at least $100 billion, in fact, likely much more than that, for developing countries to adapt and mitigate the worst of climate change in their countries. On this one solid concrete goal, will we see any progress at this COP29 summit?
Remains to be seen, I suppose. This COP will be certainly focused all around money, all around finance. The Azerbaijan presidency has been pretty steadfast on that the point of this COP is to mobilise the vast amounts of money that are required, increasingly required, by developing countries, climate vulnerable countries, countries that are experiencing already the very worst impacts of climate change. Now, previously, the framework for delivering climate finance to those countries was this $100 billion US dollars that richer nations had promised to provide every year. And by and large, that finance has not been delivered, yet there is even greater ambition to create this new financial mechanism that will deliver much more than the $100 billion. we're talking about trillions of dollars a year under an ideal scenario. A lot of skepticism around whether this will be the event that can unlock all of that money, both from public sources and from private finance. Who is going to put up this money? And emerging as well are questions around a political climate leadership vacuum that's emerged given the re-election of Donald Trump and pulling out potentially from the Paris Agreement, and what China can bring to the table and whether it will finally start to deliver some of the climate finance that developing countries are calling for.
Oh, thanks for that. CNA's climate change correspondent Jack Bod live from Baku there, Azerbaijan, of course, hosting the COP29 climate change summit.